Written in 1961 by legendary Nobel Prize winning author Trinidadian V.S. Naipaul, A House of Biswas is one of the most widely read novels in world literature history. Among its strongest themes are colonization, independence, freedom, dreams, masculinity, existentialism, confinement, the Sisyphean myth, among so many others. The story follows Mohan Biswas, also known as Mr. Biswas. He is born with an extra finger, which some pundit interprets as a bad sign that means Mohan Biswas will be an unlucky spendthrift and should be kept away from natural sources of water because it may trigger misfortune. Later on in his life as a child, despite all his parents' attempts to prevent it, this prophecy somewhat comes true. His father dies from drowning in a near forbidden stream trying to search for him after he hides from the people after losing a neighbor's calf. Because of this tragedy, his family is dismantled and the rest of his family go their separate ways and stay at new different homes with relatives. Because Mr. Biswas is of Brahmin caste, he is sent by Tara to study becoming a Hindu Pandit under the supervision of the Pandit Jairam. But this goes awry after he gets kicked out by Jairam for throwing a towel that has excrement on it and inadvertently onto a tree, the flowers of which are used for a Hindu ritual. This leads to another move to his uncle Ajoda's alcoholic brother, who owns a rum shop. However, this is also short-lived. Pandant kicks him out after he falsely accuses Mr. Biswas of theft. Mr. Biswas soon discovers a talent for sign lettering and starts doing it as his job. While doing it, he encounters the Tulsis for the first time as he meets Sharma working in their store. Mr. Biswas shows romantic interest for the young girl Sharma. However, to his surprise, Sharma and her Tulsi family are more than forthcoming with the relationship more than he is. They actually go to the extent of somewhat pressuring a marriage between them, which Mr. Biswas is too scared to say no to. Mr. Biswas accepts the marriage to Sharma and moves into the Hanuman house with the large Tulsi family. This is the house where he clashes a lot with the Tulsi extended family, who often disrespect and undermine him. This motivates him to dream venturing out and owning a house of his own. This is the one goal that would impact most of his actions because the house would be a statement of control, achievement and economic independence, something he has lacked all his life so far. So Seth and Mrs. Tulsi allow he and Sharma to move to a settlement known as the Chase, where they will run a store owned by the Tulsis. At first, Mr. Biswas enjoys running the store at first, but he eventually fails in running it when he is involved in a bad business and is left with outstanding debts. The Tulsis then move Mr. Biswas and Sharma, who now have a daughter named Sav, to live in the barracks among plantation workers in the town of Greenville, where Mr. Biswas is to work as an overseer on the estate owned by a Tulsi family member called Seth. While there, being despised by the workers, and Mr. Biswas also gains a feeling of unhappiness in his marriage to Sharma. Nonetheless, he hires a man to start building a house at Greenville that would be for him and his close family, which now also includes a son named Anand. Unfortunately, though he manages to move into the house, it is heavily damaged by a storm, which leaves Mr. Biswas into a deeper state of depression and disenchantment with this life. The Tulsis, fearing that his depression has become so intense that it may lead him to harm himself or others, the Tulsis once again bring Mr. Biswas back to the Hanuman house to mentally recover. Now, as the father of 4 children, when he recovers, he even becomes more determined to achieve something of his life and finally establish his own independence from his in-laws. So again, Mr. Biswas leaves his wife and children and goes to the capital city of Port of Spain, where he gets a job as a journalist at the Trinidad Sentinel. This impresses the Tulsis, and Mr. Biswas eventually reunites with Sharma and returns to Hanuman house, where he gets an invitation from Mrs. Tulsi to move in with her and her son Howard to a house the family owns in Port of Spain. Mr. Biswas accepts after Mrs. Tulsi sends her son Howard to England to study medicine. She leaves the House of Port of Spain, and Mr. Biswas even begins to consider the house as his own. However, Seth again decides to come and assert ownership by cutting down trees and destroying gardens to accommodate a shed for his fleet of trucks. This causes a division within the family, with Seth on one side and most of the other Tulsis on the other. This pushes Mrs. Tulsi to once again relocate the extended family, this time to a large country estate known as Short Hills. Later there comes a time of great tribulation for the Tulsi household as Mrs. Tulsi falls ill, and both her Pandit Hari and her sister Padma, Seth's wife, die. To make matters worse, the World War II breaks out. Combined with the lack of resources strains Mr. Biswas's living conditions and fuels his desire further for a change. Sensing the home climate is becoming unpleasant, Mohan decides to build another house, but still he moves back to Mrs. Tulsi's house in Port of Spain. But Howard eventually returns from abroad with his medical degree, and Mrs. Tulsi consequently recovers and kicks out Mr. Biswas temporarily to refurbish the house and make room for Howard's arrival. Later on, Mr. Biswas goes at odds with the family again. An incident in which Howard humiliates his son Anand, and another in which Mr. Biswas feels disrespected by those with whom he shares a home, becomes the final straw for him. Mr. Biswas decides that he must leave and cut out the Tulsi household from his life for good. He finds a home for sale and borrows money from Ajodad to purchase this fragile and weak house that he pays more than its worth. However, the family works hard to try and repair its flaws. Mr. Biswas's efforts perhaps did not pay off individually because he was alienated his whole life, but on a more positive note, he leaves his family a legacy and his children turn out well. His son Anand goes abroad to study, while Savi wins a scholarship. In some ways, Mr. Biswas's efforts perhaps did not pay off individually, but at least he was able to give his children a good life.
If you have an African novel you want to see Doodle summarize, do not hesitate to comment below. Don't forget to subscribe for more original, great Afrocentric content like this. Thanks for watching Mimsy Doodle Summaries.